Good evening and welcome to our 7th Thursday night debate of term. The motion tonight is "This House believes the 21st century can make Marxism work." It's been a number of years since we've discussed a motion with the word Marxism in it, so I'm hoping for a spirited, engaged discussion on a contentious existential political issue. Just as a reminder to the audience, it's your prerogative as our members in the audience to ask points of information during our paper speaker speeches. It's equally their prerogative to deny you that. So if you ask point of information and you're politely declined by a paper speaker, please do respect this. So, without further ado, speaking first in proposition of the motion, "This House believes the 21st century can make Marxism work," is Judy Cox. Judy is a lifelong socialist writer and speaker, teaching in East London on the editorial board of International Socialism. Miss Cox wrote The Women's Revolution, which reappraised the male-centred narratives of the Russian Revolution. Judy, you have the ears of the House.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invite. And when I got the invite, I thought it was an unusual invitation for me. This isn't something I've ever done before, and I looked into how these debates are run, and I was told that you have to give way to people and allow them to interrupt you. And as a lifelong primary school teacher, this goes a bit against the grain because I'm not used to allowing people to interrupt me, but obviously you can feel free tonight. So I was a bit nervous about how things ran, and Sammy very kindly sent me a video of a previous debate, which was "This House has no confidence in the government," and it was the government of Liz Truss. And I thought they had a really easy gig compared to what I have tonight, because I don't want you to just vote for the motion. As you probably know, left-wing socialists, Trotskyists, Marxists like me don't think voting achieves that much, so I want you to vote for the motion. But more importantly, I want you to take action to change the world we live in. I want you to take responsibility for acting on this world and making it a better one. Can the 21st century rescue Marxism? Yes. And also, I believe Marxism can rescue the 21st century. And I think it's an important belief and an important hope, because we need a radical change. We need something very different. The last century, I looked up some statistics, 86 million people died in wars in the last century. This century started with Ukraine, and it's carried on in Gaza. Thousands and thousands and millions of lives torn apart. But more importantly even than that, we are hurtling towards a climate catastrophe. And it may not feel like that in Cambridge because you're young and optimistic and bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and so you should be about the future. But climate change cannot just be locked outside. It is impinging on our world, not just in the future, but now. The great acceleration, the non-linear runaway climate events, the fact that the US Army says the critical infrastructure of America will not cope with climate emergencies, not in 100 years or 50 years or 30 years, but in 10 years' time, our way of life could be destroyed by climate catastrophe. And I believe we're living in an age of catastrophe, of economic crisis, of political crisis, and of climate catastrophe. Antonio Gramsci, the great Italian revolutionary who died in Mussolini's jails in 1937, talked about living in the age of monsters. And he knew what monsters looked like because he'd seen Stalin, he'd seen Mussolini, he'd seen Hitler, and he'd seen Franco. And I think today, those monsters are not bestride the world stage, but they're in the shadows. They're watching for their opportunity to seize on the crisis, to seize on people's anger, and to seize on people's despair. They are waiting for the centre to give way, for the political centre to not hold anymore. And therefore, it's vitally important, I believe, that we can offer an alternative not based on despair, on racism, on scapegoating, but based on hope and optimism and solidarity. Now, Marx comes into the picture at this point. Marx wrote a lot about how capitalism was a vampire-like system. It lived by sucking the blood of workers and became bloated and disgusting the more blood it sucked. But in fact, it's Marx who's risen from the dead time and time again. Every time there's an economic crisis, as there was in 2008, people have Marx back on the front page. Marx, maybe he was right all the time. Every time there's a huge revolt around in the world system, which there was in the Middle East in 2011-12, people go back to Marx, the prediction of revolt against the system of collective struggle. So the heart of Marxism, which I believe is behind the fact that Marxism revives like this, is the idea that there are two great conflicts in society, two great antagonisms. The first is between the capitalists themselves. They are driven to compete with each other, driven by the logic of the system. That creates dynamism, that creates technological change, but it means they ignore the consequences for human welfare and for planetary welfare. It means they drive us into economic crises, and it means it spills over into state conflict, imperialism, and war, not as aberrations, but as part of this world system. The second great division is that between the capitalists and the working class. The capitalists are driven to intensify our exploitation, and we, the working class, are driven to organise collectively to resist. And it doesn't matter whether we have some racist ideas, some homophobic ideas, some backward ideas. If we want to fight to improve our lives, we have to join with others, and that breaks down the prejudices and the divisions. Now, of course, there will be people who say this is hopelessly out of date, you know, this is all describing the 19th century, and indeed the names have changed. Of course they have, the products have changed, but the system, the exploitation, the gross and obscene and growing inequalities remains the same. And we face the same contradiction that Marx faced. The potential of human creativity and labour to solve our problems, to discover new ways of living and of curing disease, is turned by capitalism into its opposite, a way to oppress us, a way to divide us, and a way to keep us down. And Marx described it like this. He said, on the one hand, there have started into life industrial and scientific forces which no epoch of human history had ever suspected. But at the same time, there are symptoms of decay worse than the Roman Empire. Machinery gifted with the wonderful power of shortening and fructifying human labour, we behold starving and overworking it. The newfangled sources of wealth, by some strange and weird spell, are turned into sources of want. And that's the quote I think of when I look at AI and people talking about this fantastic technology that could do so much for us, but in fact is making people fearful of losing their jobs and fearful of losing control over the planet. So the institutions that dominate our lives, that are run by human beings, are set up by human beings, organised by human beings, appear to dominate us, appear to be beyond our control, beyond human capacity to control. And this makes us feel that there is no alternative to capitalism, a capitalist realism. So Ursula Le Guin, who's a fantastic science fiction writer, described it like this. She said, we live in capitalism and its power seems inescapable. So did the divine right of kings. Any human power can be resisted and changed by any human beings. Our economic system is not beyond our control. We are the people who run it. So I want to argue that I can understand why people who are driven to despair, driven by fury, by the failures of neoliberal capitalism to deliver for them, can be vulnerable to arguments. Blame the foreigners, blame the people in the small boats, build a bigger wall, to scapegoating people. But what I can't stand is the pound shop Enoch Powells who stir up that hatred and do it to get the politicians and the rich off the hook. The threat to our society does not come from small boats. If it comes from anywhere, it comes from luxury yachts and millionaires' jet planes. And politicians who have nothing to offer us, no new schools, no new hospitals, no new ways of thinking about the world, reach for the whole attack on woke, attack on the lefties, attack on the people who eat tofu, attack on the people who have different pronouns. They do that in order to deflect anger away from themselves and keep the system ticking over. It was not Muslims who crashed the economy in 2008. It is not refugees who passed a budget like Liz Truss did that we're still paying for in our mortgages. It is not their fault that 2.4 million people in this country, 2.4 children in this country, are living in poverty. I believe that Marxism is about the self-emancipation of the working class, that real change will not come through Parliament. Parliament last week was an obscene spectacle of people who should know better, chasing seats at the price of the people in Gaza, at the price of all their principles and beliefs. I do not think that Keir Starmer, holding us hostage by saying you've got to vote Labour, otherwise we'll get the Tories in, is a real path for inspiring change. We make the wealth. 10% of the world population have 78% of the world's wealth and produce 48% of carbon emissions. Expropriate them, take the wealth, redistribute the wealth, and take the power and the democracy. Forbes list, again, I had a quick look at. The richest man in the world is Bernard Arnold. He's worth $211 billion. You know what he makes? Not kidney machines, not clean water fountains, fashion and makeup. Now, you might like fashion and makeup, some of us do, that's fine. But the idea that this is what's rewarded in this society is obscene. So I believe the working class is the global majority class, it is the class that has the collective power, and it is the class that has the collective interest in overthrowing this system. In 1916, the great revolutionary Rosa Luxemburg said, our choice is socialism or barbarism. And I believe that barbarism is here and it's becoming normalised. We want ordinary people not just to wait for elections but to fight now for what they believe in, as the trade unionists did, as the Chartists did, as the suffragettes did, as the Black Lives Matter people did. We can fight now in order to begin to sow the seeds of a real transformation that can take the wealth from the rich and give democracy and freedom to the world's majority.